It starts slowly. You don't notice it at first because no one ever tells you it has a name. You're just a kid, sitting at the edge of the living room couch, watching the people who are supposed to be your anchors begin to drift. Maybe it's addiction. Maybe it's rage. Maybe it's just the silent emptiness of someone too exhausted or too wounded to show up as a parent. And somewhere in that small, tender brain of yours, a switch flips. No one says it out loud, but you feel it in your bones. If I don't hold this family together, no one will. And that's the moment, though you don't know it yet, that childhood quietly ends. Not because you got older, but because you were drafted into a role you never signed up for. You become the listener, the fixer, the one who notices everything. You smile more, you cry less, you learn to read the emotional weather in the room before you speak. You take the temperature of every sigh, every slammed door, every too long silence. You become the emotional thermostat for everyone else, and the world praises you for it. You're told you're mature, you're responsible, you're wise beyond your years, but no one ever asks you the question that matters: at what cost? This is the grief of those who grew up too fast, because when a child becomes the parent, or the peacemaker, or the therapist, it doesn't just disappear when they turn 18. Those patterns follow you into your relationships, your work, your sense of worth. If you don't understand what happened, you end up living the same survival strategies that once protected you, but now quietly destroy you. Psychologists call this parentification, when a child is forced to carry emotional or practical responsibilities that belong to adults. And it does more than just make you mature. It changes the way your brain wires itself, because when you spend your childhood keeping everyone else okay, your nervous system becomes hyper-attuned to danger, to conflict, to disappointment. It creates something called hypervigilance. Hypervigilance sounds like a superpower at first. You can walk into a room and sense tension before anyone says a word. You notice the change in someone's tone, the way their shoulders slump when they're about to snap, the forced smile they use to hide their sadness. But here's the catch. When you grow up in constant emotional uncertainty, your body stops believing the world is safe, even when it is. Your brain learns to scan for threats the way someone else checks their phone, constantly, compulsively, without even realizing they're doing it. And this kind of watchfulness comes at a price, because when you're always bracing for impact, you never fully relax. You never fully trust. You never fully rest. It's like living with an alarm system that never shuts off. But this story isn't just about childhood, it's about what happens 20 or 30 years later, when the child who was too responsible, too caring, too wise beyond their years, becomes the adult who can't stop people-pleasing, or the partner who always feels anxious when things are too calm, or the employee who burns out because they never learned to say no. Because here's the thing, the strategies that once saved you don't know when to stop saving you. That's what makes this so hard to see. The world rewards you for being dependable, selfless, always holding it together. But deep down, part of you is still that kid on the couch, carrying things far too heavy for your small hands. And that's what we're diving into today, because if you don't understand how parentification shapes your mind, you end up living your whole life in survival mode, never realizing there's another way to exist. In the next section, we're going deeper into the psychology behind this, why this happens, what it does to the nervous system, and how it follows you into adulthood in ways you might not even recognize. You're always scanning for danger. It becomes second nature, like breathing. You learn to read the room before you even step inside it. Is today calm, or is the storm coming? Did Dad slam the door a little harder than usual? Is Mom quiet in that dangerous way that means she's about to explode? This is how it starts, and soon you begin to believe love itself is conditional. You start thinking, if I can keep the peace, maybe I'll be safe. If I can stay small, maybe no one will break. So you disappear. Not physically. You still laugh when they expect you to, still get straight A's, still bring home the trophies, still show the world how good you are. But emotionally, you vanish. You lock away your own needs, your own fears, your own anger, because those things only ever seem to make things worse. And in their place grows a version of you that the world applauds, the good child, the quiet achiever, the one who never causes trouble, the one who has it all together. You become the person everyone can rely on, the friend who always listens, the partner who never complains, the co-worker who never asks for help. And the mask fits so perfectly that even you start to believe it's real. But deep down, something hurts because the inner child you buried, they didn't vanish, they're still there, silent but screaming, "Why didn't anyone protect me?" And here's where it gets complicated. When you grow older, the patterns only get more sophisticated. You might become hyper-independent, the kind of person who refuses help because needing anyone feels dangerous. You might push people away, not because you want to, but because love never felt safe. You might feel strangely numb in moments when life is good, because joy feels like a trick, like something you didn't earn, like something that might be ripped away at any second. And worst of all, you might not even realize you're still stuck in survival mode. Because here's the thing, when dysfunction becomes normal early on, your nervous system treats chaos like home. Stillness feels suspicious. Peace feels uncomfortable. Love feels like a debt you'll eventually have to repay. This is what psychologists call complex trauma. Not one big event, but 1,000 small cuts that change the way you see yourself and the world. And the story always follows a similar script. You become the rescuer. You become the performer. You become the one who never asks for anything. But the cost, you never truly feel safe. Not in relationships, not in your own body, not even in your own mind, because you learned early that being too much or needing too much makes people leave. So you built a life around making sure no one ever would. But here's the part that's easy to miss. No child willingly chooses this. It's not a conscious decision. It's not about wanting to be the adult in the room. It's survival. A child steps into that role because on some level they believe if they don't, everything will fall apart. And they're not wrong. When the adults are too consumed by their own chaos to provide safety, the child takes on the impossible job of keeping the family emotionally alive. They carry what was never theirs to carry, and that changes everything: how they love, how they work, how they see themselves. In the next section, we're going to peel this back even further. Why does the nervous system hold on so tightly to these patterns? Why is it so hard to let them go even when you finally have safety? And most importantly, how do you begin to break free? Because children will do anything for attachment, even abandon themselves. It's never a conscious choice. It's biology. A child's nervous system is wired for connection the way lungs are wired for air. In the absence of safety, the body doesn't negotiate, it adapts. It rewrites the rules of selfhood. It says, okay, if being myself risks losing love, then I'll become whatever keeps love here, authenticity or attachment. The child always chooses attachment, not because they're weak, but because that's survival, that's instinct, that's intelligence at work. But here's the tragedy. What saved you as a child becomes the prison of your adulthood. So many of us are walking around as high-functioning adults with deeply neglected inner children pulling the strings. On the surface, you look fine. You look more than fine. You look together. You're the one people admire for how much you handle, how steady you are, how you never fall apart. But they don't see the cost. They don't see how you overachieve because somewhere inside you're still trying to earn love you should have been given freely. They don't see how you stay quiet in relationships, terrified that if you voice your needs, people will leave. They don't see how you take care of everyone else while secretly wishing someone, just one person, would stop and ask if you're okay. And maybe you've had this fantasy that someone will notice, that someone will look past the competence, the humor, the calm exterior, and see the small, tired child underneath. That maybe, just maybe, you'll finally get to fall apart, and someone will hold you. That fantasy isn't about your adult self. It's the unmet need of the child who never got to be a child. This is why so many people feel confused about their own suffering. They think, but nothing that bad happened to me. They compare themselves to others who had it worse. They dismiss their own pain because it wasn't loud or obvious. But neglect doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like absence. Sometimes it looks like a smile hiding exhaustion. Sometimes it looks like a child who behaves perfectly because they've learned perfection is the only thing that keeps them safe. And here's the hard truth. You can't heal from something you keep telling yourself didn't matter. The first step isn't fixing. It isn't positive thinking. It's witnessing. It's saying, yes, that happened. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it shaped me. Because until you validate your own story, you will gaslight yourself with thoughts like, it wasn't that bad. Other people had it worse. I should be over this by now. But the body doesn't heal from logic. It heals from being seen. This is why people stay stuck for years. They try to think their way out of trauma. They try to move on without ever turning around to look at what actually happened. But the nervous system doesn't care about the stories you tell yourself. It remembers what it felt like to be small and scared and responsible for keeping everyone else okay. Until that part of you feels safe, truly safe, you will keep living as if the danger never ended. In the next section, we're going to talk about what happens when you start listening to that part of yourself, the part that was silenced, the part that still lives in survival mode, the part that isn't asking for advice or productivity hacks, just for someone to finally say, I see you, it wasn't your fault. Because healing doesn't start with doing, it starts with noticing. Fine is a mask. You know it. The world knows it too if it bothers to look closely enough. But most people don't. They see the grades, the promotions, the perfect smile, and they clap. They tell you how strong you are, how inspiring, how capable. They don't see the cost. Because what happens to that child when they grow up? They become adults who never feel safe, even in calm rooms. They become lovers who don't know what to do with tenderness. They become givers who don't remember how to receive. They become the kind of people who apologize for crying, who flinch at compliments, who confuse exhaustion with success, because being tired all the time feels like proof you're doing something right. This is the quiet cost of growing up too fast. Because if your childhood taught you to be strong instead of soft, responsible instead of real, silent instead of honest, then what kind of adulthood do you inherit? You inherit a life where you're always bracing, where you're always holding your breath, waiting for someone to finally give you permission to collapse, to stop pretending you're fine, to stop being the strong one. But here's the hard truth. No one is coming. Not because people don't care, but because most will never see the child you buried. They'll see the version of you that learned how to function, the version that learned how to smile, the version that learned how to say, I'm okay, even when you're not. So the rescue won't come from outside, it comes from you. You are the one who must go back and hold that child's hand. You are the one who must say the words no one else ever said. You didn't deserve that. You were just a child. You get to rest now. This is what shadow work really is. Not fixing, not performing, not papering over the pain with good vibes only, positivity, but turning toward the parts of yourself you abandoned to survive and saying, I see you now. I hear you now. I'm not leaving this time. And yes, it hurts because real healing always starts with grief. Grief for the birthdays no one celebrated. Grief for the small version of you who had to grow up before they were ready. Grief for the innocence lost while you were busy holding together people who should have been holding you. But that grief, it isn't weakness. It's proof you've stopped running from the truth, because what was frozen is finally thawing. What was silenced is finally speaking, and what you locked away is finally coming home. But here's the thing most people miss. The survival patterns don't always look like suffering. Sometimes they look like success. The straight A student, the reliable friend, the star employee who never complains, never needs help, never seems to break. People will praise you for the very thing that's quietly destroying you. They'll call you independent when really you're just terrified of being a burden. They'll call you selfless when really you don't know how to have needs without feeling guilty. They'll call you mature when really you never got to be a kid. This is how childhood trauma hides in plain sight. Not in chaos, but in competence. Not in rebellion, but in perfection. Not in loud suffering, but in silent self-sufficiency. In the next section, we're going to trace these patterns into adulthood, how they show up in relationships, in ambition, in mental health, and why so many high-functioning people secretly feel empty, restless, and alone, no matter how much they achieve. You might be in relationships where you overfunction, always fixing, always managing, always over-explaining yourself to avoid conflict, and then quietly wondering why you feel so resentful, so tired, so unseen. You might find it almost impossible to say no because somewhere deep down, no still feels like betrayal. But here's the truth most people don't want to face. These aren't personality traits, they're coping strategies, learned, conditioned, rehearsed until they felt like part of your DNA. But the good news? What was learned can be unlearned. The first step is to stop worshipping the mask you built. Stop calling your exhaustion strength. Stop calling your numbness resilience. Stop calling your self-abandonment maturity. Because healing doesn't come from idolizing the parts of you that kept you alive. It comes from honoring the wounds that told you those parts were necessary in the first place. One of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself is this: what did I need back then that I never got? And if you're quiet long enough, the answers will come. You may hear things like, I needed someone to tell me it wasn't my fault. I needed someone to ask how I was doing and actually listen. I needed to laugh without fear, to rest without guilt, to play without looking over my shoulder. And this is where the real work begins. Because slowly, painfully, awkwardly, imperfectly, you begin to give those things to yourself. Not to rewrite the past, but to stop reliving it. This is how you stop seeking parents in your partners. This is how you stop mistaking anxiety for intuition, chaos for passion, exhaustion for accomplishment. This is how you stop running from the child you were, from the adult you've become, from the life you secretly want but don't believe you deserve. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And he was right, because shadow work isn't glamorous. It asks you to face everything you've spent years avoiding: the neglected parts, the ashamed parts, the furious, frightened, fractured parts, all the pieces you buried because you thought love required you to be someone else. But here's the paradox. Healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be, before you learned to smile through fear, before you learned to hide your needs, before you learned to earn the love that should have been unconditional. So if you're someone who grew up too fast, hear this: your maturity was never the problem. The problem was that you had no choice, but now you do. You can choose softness, you can choose rest, you can choose to stop carrying everyone else's emotions like they're your responsibility. You can choose to put down the weight that was never yours in the first place. And no, it won't happen overnight. You've spent years becoming the strong one. It will take time to learn softness again. It will take time to let yourself rest without guilt. It will take time to stop apologizing for existing. But every time you listen to the parts of yourself you once abandoned, every time you give yourself what you needed back then, you break the cycle, not by becoming someone new, but by finally coming home to yourself. There will be days when you feel like a child again. Good, that's the point. For so long, you've been trying to grow up, to be strong, to be capable. But healing isn't about rushing further into adulthood. It's about circling back to the places you abandoned. It's about finally letting the parts of you that were silenced, shamed, or ignored come home. So let that child cry, let them laugh, let them be angry, let them be seen, maybe for the first time in your life, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person who was always worthy of care. Because you're not broken, you're becoming whole, and maybe for the first time, you're finally growing up the right way. Not through pressure, not through fear, not through the weight of carrying everyone else's chaos, but through truth, through the honesty of finally saying, I needed love, I needed safety, I needed someone to tell me it wasn't my job to hold the world together. And the beautiful thing is, it's not too late. You never had a childhood maybe, but you still have a future, and this time you get to write it. This is what it means to break the cycle. Not to erase the past, but to stop living as if you're still trapped in it, to stop defining yourself by who you had to be in order to survive, because survival is not the same as living. And one day, you get tired of surviving. You get tired of bracing for impact that never comes, get tired of holding your breath in relationships, in careers, in your own skin. And that's when the work shifts. It's no longer about fixing yourself because you were never broken. It's about learning to feel safe in joy, safe in rest, safe in love. Because when you grow up in chaos, peace can feel unfamiliar, even suspicious. But the more you stay, the more you breathe through the discomfort, the more you let yourself feel what was once forbidden. The more you realize safety isn't the absence of fear, it's the presence of self-trust. This is why healing takes time. It asks you to rewrite the story your body has lived in for decades. It asks you to stay when you want to run, to feel when you want to numb, to soften when you want to armor up. It asks you to become the parent you always needed, not for your children, not for your partner, but for yourself. And no, the past doesn't vanish. You will still have days when old patterns whisper to you, days when love feels dangerous, days when rest feels lazy, days when boundaries feel selfish. But that's okay, because healing isn't a straight line, it's a spiral. You keep coming back to the same lessons, but each time with a little more compassion, a little less shame, a little more courage to stay with yourself when things get hard. So maybe this is what growing up really means. Not hardening, not toughening, not carrying the weight of everyone else's storms, but finally letting yourself be human, messy, tender, whole. Because in the end, what you needed wasn't perfection, it wasn't strength, it was safety, it was love that didn't have to be earned. And now, as an adult, you get to learn what that feels like, sometimes for the very first time, because the story isn't over, and this time you get to write it the way it should have been written all along.